Good day, everyone, and welcome to the second chapter of our Anatomy and Physiology. In this chapter, we will be discussing the chemical basis of life. This is a crash course in general chemistry that would be applied to the lessons to be learned in anatomy and physiology. So let's start. So basic knowledge of chemistry is essential for understanding anatomy and physiology. Chemistry is the scientific discipline concerned with atomic composition and structure of substances and the reaction they undergo. This chapter will outline some basic chemical principles and emphasizes their relationship to humans. So to start, let us differentiate matter, mass, and weight. So matter is anything that occupies space and has mass. So you have already learned this in your grade school science, that anything that occupies space and has mass is called matter. Mass is the amount of matter in an object. This is usually measured in grams, while weight is the mass of the object multiplied with the gravitational force. So weight, if we're talking on a physics perspective, weight is equal to mass times gravity. So gravity is 9.8 meter per second squared. If you multiply mass times gravity, which is a unit of force of acceleration, you will have Newton. Okay, so Newton is actually a unit of weight. So please differentiate mass and weight accordingly. However, for the medical sciences, mass and weight are usually interchangeable. Next, we have elements and atoms. So an element is the simplest type of matter having a unique chemical property, meaning each element is different from one another. So examples is your carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, calcium, potassium, sodium, and chloride. These are the most common elements you will encounter in our biological sciences. An atom, on the other hand, is the smallest particle of an element that has the chemical characteristic of that element. So element is the simplest type of matter, having unique chemical properties, while atom is the smallest particle of an element. So elements are made out of atoms of that element. So let's talk about the atomic structure. Atoms consist of neutrons, which are, you have your neutrons, which are neutral in nature. When we say neutral in nature, there is no charge. You have positively charged protons and negatively charged electrons. Neutrons, neutral, positively charged protons, and electrons are negatively charged. An atom is usually electrically neutral because the number of protons equals the number of electrons. Okay, so protons equals electrons, usually. Okay, therefore, the whole atom is neutral in nature. If they are not neutral in nature, it is called an ion. If there is an imbalance of proton and electrons, it can be positively charged and negatively charged. So protons and neutrons are in the nucleus. P and N are in the nucleus. No, sorry. Protons and neutrons are found in the nucleus. So the nucleus is in the middle of the atom, while the electrons are found outside the nucleus. Particularly, it is rapidly moving around in its electron cloud. Okay, it is represented as cloud. It's because electrons are so fast moving, they actually exhibit a property that they occupy an area instead of a single point. Okay, so this is the structure of an atom. You have the nucleus in the middle, which contains your atoms, your protons and your neutrons, while everything around is your electron cloud. Your electrons are found there. So these are some sample elements of hydrogen, carbon, and oxygen atoms. What is an atomic number? So an atomic number is the number of protons in each atom of the element. Each element has a unique atomic number, which is based on the number of protons. However, it is also the number of electrons, since most atoms they have equal amounts of protons and electrons. So it can be either number of electrons or protons, but it's better to count protons instead. So the mass number is the mass of protons and neutrons in each atom. So take, for example, the mass number of carbon is 12. Okay, so mass number equals mass of protons plus mass of neutrons. Okay, please take note that mass number is also called your molar mass in higher chemistries. Next, we have our chemical bonds. What are the different types of chemical bonds? So chemical bond occurs when the outermost electrons are transferred or shared between electrons. If there is a movement of electrons between atoms, a chemical bond will form. We have two main types. We have ionic and we have covalent bonding. So for ionic bonding, it is the bonding of ions. So what are ions? Ions are electrically charged particles formed when atoms lose or gain electrons. So these are atoms that are positively or negatively charged. How does this occur? This occurs usually if the atom loses an electron or gains an electron. It's actually about stability and the number of electrons in its valence shell, but we will not go deeper than that. Okay, that is for your chemistry class. Like for example, sodium. Sodium is Na. However, sodium ion is denoted with Na positive, meaning it is positively charged. It lost one electron. Next is ionic bonding. Ionic bonding results when electrons are transferred between atoms, creating oppositely charged ions. Okay, so it usually occurs when a positively charged ion bonds with a negatively charged ion. Please take note that a positively charged ion is called your cation, and your negatively charged ion is your anion. Okay. So a good example of ionic bonding is sodium and chloride. So sodium is positively charged and chloride is negatively charged. When they are held together or bond together, they form sodium chloride or your table salt. How do they form? They form because sodium tends to lose electrons while chloride tends to gain electrons. So when sodium loses one electron, that electron will actually go to your chloride. Chloride needs one electron to become stable, and the movement of electron from sodium to chloride forms sodium chloride or your table salt. Okay, so sodium lost one electron and it is received by your chlorine or chloride to form sodium chloride. Covalent bonding, on the other hand, is formed when atoms share one or more pairs of electrons. How does this differ from ionic bonding? From ionic, there is movement. It means that the electron moves from atom to atom. While for covalent, they share electrons, meaning they put their electrons together to form the bond. The resulting combination of atoms is called a molecule. A molecule is any compound that has more than one atom. So covalent bonds between two hydrogen atoms form a hydrogen molecule. Okay, so I would like to explain why two hydrogen atoms form a hydrogen molecule. So hydrogen has an atomic number of 1. Plain hydrogen is positively charged. So if you have two hydrogens, they can share their electrons together and you will form H2, or your hydrogen molecule. Okay, it actually needs to be explained that if you recall your electron configuration, the first sub-level, or your 1s, only requires 2 atoms. That is why hydrogen forms a biatomic molecule. Okay, so a single covalent bond is sharing of one pair of electrons by 2 atoms. This is indicated by a single line between the symbols of atoms. Take, for example, HH. Double covalent bonds is sharing of 2 pairs of electrons by 2 atoms. Carbon atom combines with 2 oxygen atoms to form carbon dioxide. It is indicated by a double line between the atoms. This represents 2 covalent bonds. Okay, so this is how atoms share their electrons. What they actually do is they combine their electron cloud, and when their electron cloud appears to touch, the electrons, instead of focusing around the cloud, it will actually focus just on the middle, forming that bond. Okay. So instead of the electron orbiting the atom, the electron will be most likely found in between the 2 atoms, forming that bond. Next, covalent bonding. We have 2 types of covalent bonding. We have polar covalent bonding and non-polar covalent bonding. Okay. So a polar covalent bond is an asymmetrical sharing of electrons between 2 atoms. Molecules with asymmetrical electrical charges are called polar molecules. 2 atoms can share their electrons with an oxygen atoms. This is water. On the other hand, we have non-polar covalent bonds. This is the equal sharing of electrons between atoms. Molecules with symmetrical electrical charges are called non-polar molecules. Okay, so let me simplify this from non-polar to polar. Polar, non-polar. Polar has a positive side and a negative side. Hence the term polar. The molecule has a positive side and a negative side. While non-polar, there is no prevalent charge. There is no prevalent charge. Okay? Meaning the whole structure of that molecule is neutral, while a structure of a polar molecule has a positive and negative side. Okay, an example of a polar molecule is water. This is water. Okay, the positive side of water is the hydrogen parts, while the negative side of water is near the oxygen part. Why does polarity occur? Polarity occurs because electrons tend to pull in one side of the atom or one side of the molecule. Okay? Kumbaga po, nagtitipon-tipon ang mga electron sa isang side ng molecule. Bakit sila nagtitipon-tipon? It's because of electronegativity, which I will not explain right now. If you want, I will also leave a link in the video description, or if you want to learn more about bonding of polar and non-polar structures. Okay, so just take note that polar has a positive and a negative side. A non-polar molecule, take for example hydrogen. Hydrogen is non-polar because there is no concentration of electrons in one point. The concentration of electrons is found in the middle. That is why there is no positive, there is no negative charge. Okay, so polar and non-polar molecules behave differently. That is why it is important to distinguish them. Okay, so this is a model of polarity. So these are some important ions you should memorize. So the common ions like calcium, sodium, potassium, hydrogen, hydroxide, chloride, bicarbonate, ammonium, phosphate, iron, magnesium, and iodide. These are important for body functions. If I were to decide which are the most important, sodium, potassium, important for almost everything. Hydrogen, hydroxide for bases. Bicarbonate, not so much. It only regulates acid bases. And iron, magnesium, and iodide are supplementary ions. So next we have our hydrogen bonds. Hydrogen bonds is a special type of bond that relies on weak polar attraction. Polar molecules has a positive end and a negative end. So what I drew earlier, the water molecule, I demonstrated that water has a positive side and a negative side. Hydrogen bond forms when positive ends of one polar molecule is weakly attracted to the negative end of another polar molecule. The attraction between the molecules is much weaker than ionic or covalent bonds. And let me demonstrate. Okay, ganito po siya. But if you want, I will draw it again. Okay, so let's draw water. We have one molecule of oxygen and 1 and 2 molecules of hydrogen. Okay, so we have a lone pair here of oxygen. This part of the molecule is negatively charged, while this part of the molecule is positively charged. Okay, what happens if another molecule of hydrogen occurs or becomes near? Okay, the negative portion of water here and the positive portion of another molecule of water will be attracted to each other because they have different charges. Positive and negative charges attract each other. Therefore, what happens is, I will not draw the charges anymore. There is a weak attraction between oxygen and hydrogen, and this is your hydrogen bond. Okay. The hydrogen bond is also responsible for many properties of water, particularly your surface tension. Okay, so this is the better illustration. Next, we have molecules and compounds. When we say molecule, it is formed when 2 or more atoms are chemically combined. It does not need to be the same, just 2 or more atoms in one structure, that is a molecule. A compound, on the other hand, is 2 or more atoms that are different. Okay? 2 or more different types of atoms. So a molecule can be HH, while compound should be different, like CO2. Next, we have dissociation. What is dissociation? Dissociation is the separation of ions in an ionic compound by polar water molecules. When ionic compounds dissolve in water, their ions dissociate or separate from each other because the positively charged ions are attracted to the negative ends of the water molecules and the negatively charged ions are attracted to the positive ends of the water molecules. These dissociated ions are sometimes called your electrolytes. Let me demonstrate. Okay, let's take for example, we have sodium and chloride. Let's have table salt. They will exchange their electrons to form sodium chloride. Okay, what happens if sodium chloride is surrounded by water? Let's have 2 molecules of water here. Okay, take note that sodium is positively charged while chloride is still negatively charged. Okay, so when an ionic compound like sodium chloride is exposed to water, the chloride part or the negatively charged part of sodium chloride is attracted to the positively charged portion of water. And the positively charged sodium is attracted to the negatively charged part of oxygen, of water, which is oxygen. Okay, so sila po magsasama. What you will have is now a mixture of free sodium, free sodium ion, free chloride ion, and water. Okay, this is why if you experience dissolving salt in water, it quickly dissolves. It's because the bond between sodium and chloride are pulled apart by water, separating sodium ion or sodium cation and chloride anion separately. When they are separated, these are called your electrolytes. And electrolytes are most of the time charged. Okay, so this is another demonstration. So this is an illustration of what I just explained. Sodium is attracted to the negative part of water, which is oxygen, while chloride is attracted to the positively charged part of water, which is hydrogen. Chemical reactions. So chemical reactions are the change of substance into a new one that has a different chemical identity. Okay, it is different from physical reaction in which you only change the amount of substance. In chemical reactions, you change the substance itself. When we say reactants, these are the substances that are changed or incorporated to another substance. Ito po yung nagbabago, or this is your ingredient that changes. Products, these are the ingredient. These are the chemicals that are formed after the chemical reaction. So an example is if you combine element A and element B, it will form compound C and compound D. So most of the time, there is an arrow in between the equation, the chemical equation. So chemical equations will be discussed in your chemistry. Where the arrow points, this is where your products are. Where the arrow is not present, these are your reactants, meaning this reaction is a one-sided reaction. A to B becomes C and D, not the other way around. We have different types of chemical reactions. First is your synthesis reaction. 2 or more reactants combine to form a larger and more complex product. This is simple because they simply become one or unite. So A plus B equals AB. Example is your adenosine diphosphate, your ADP. When phosphate is added, it forms adenosine triphosphate or your ATP. Okay? A plus B equals AB. That's simple. Nagsasama lang po sila. Decomposition reaction is the opposite of synthesis reaction. One compound is broken into smaller, less complex products. In this case, it is the opposite of synthesis. AB separates to A and B. Compound AB is separated to A and B. Take for example, ATP also breaks down into ADP and phosphate, releasing energy in the process. Okay. Exchange reactions. These are also called your substitution reactions. It occurs where it is a combination of decomposition reaction and synthesis reaction. Basically, two compounds exchange their atoms. Okay, in decomposition, reactants are broken down. In synthesis, the products of decomposition are combined. So this is just a simulation of decomposition and synthesis. So AB plus CD equals AC plus BD. Please take note that they swap their partners A, B, and D and C. B and D. So this is here and this is here. If you want to show the composition first, what happens actually is AB becomes A and B, CD becomes C and D. They are broken into their separate components, then they form slightly differently, leading you with this one. Okay. However, most of the time we do not show decomposition nor synthesis. We just simply show it as exchanging of atoms, of components. Okay. So most of the time, these chemical reactions are made possible by enzymes in the body. So what is an enzyme? Right, later pala. So an enzyme basically is a catalyst and it enables chemical reactions in the body. So reversible reactions, these are chemical reactions that can proceed from reactants to products, from products to reactants. When the rate of the product is equal to the rate of the reactant formation, the reaction is said to be in equilibrium. At equilibrium, the amount of reactants relative to the amount of products remain constant, and it is indicated by two arrows pointing in opposite direction. Take for example this one. So earlier I introduced you to the single-headed arrow. If you have double-headed arrows, or that one, it means that the reaction can go from left to right or right to left. However, there is an equilibrium point. What is an equilibrium point or equilibrium? It means that the rate that products are formed is equal to the rate of another, or the reactants are regenerated. Meaning there is no more additional products or additional reactants formed. They are in equilibrium. They do not. It does not mean that they do not react anymore. It just means that they react in a rate that balances each other out. Okay, so this is called your equilibrium. So an example is carbon dioxide plus water will form hydrogen ion plus your bicarbonate ion, an ion. So energy. So what is energy? It is the capacity to do work. It is subdivided into two. You have potential and you have your kinetic energy. Potential energy, from the word potential, is stored energy. You could do work, but it's currently not doing so. Kinetic energy, on the other hand, does work by causing movement of another object. So this is, let's say, active energy. Next is chemical energy. Chemical energy is a form of potential energy that is stored in the bonds of chemical compounds, particularly in atoms and molecules. It is released in a chemical reaction, often producing heat as a byproduct. Batteries, biomass, petroleum, natural gas, coal, and are examples of stored chemical energy. These are good sources of energy. Most of our energy in chemical reactions can be denoted by heat. And a good example is the breakdown of ATP. ATP, this is, I already mentioned it earlier, but I did not bother to explain what ATP is. ATP, or your adenosine triphosphate, is usually called your energy currency of cells. This is the primary source of energy. It's because it can both store and provide energy. Okay, so when ATP is broken down, it produces energy. When ATP is formed, it stores energy. Okay, so let's have ATP versus ADP. ADP is your adenosine diphosphate. ATP has energy. Well, ADP can have energy. Meaning ADP can store energy. When ATP releases energy by releasing phosphate, it becomes ADP, which can be reused to reform ATP. So this is the structure of your ATP, adenosine triphosphate. So your adenosine is made out of your adenine together with your ribose, a nucleoacidic bond, and it has a phosphate group on the tail end. Kapag dalawa lang, it is called diphosphate. If it is 3, it is called triphosphate. Next, we have rate of chemical reactions. The rate of chemical reaction increases when the concentration of the reactants increases, the temperature increases, or a catalyst is present. Okay, for example, the concentration of reactants increases. The more reactants you have, the faster your reaction will go because it has more chance. It has a better chance of your reactants reacting with each other or colliding in your solution. Next is when temperature increases. It's because when temperature increases, energy increases. And the movement of atoms becomes faster. So when it becomes faster, it collides much more commonly and the reaction occurs faster. And finally is when the catalyst is present. A catalyst is a compound that increases rate of reaction. Oh, sinusulat ko pero nakasulat na pala. So a catalyst, usually an enzyme, is something that increases the rate of reaction without being altered permanently, meaning the catalyst or the enzyme is not consumed. Hindi siya nagagalaw. So a catalyst is, we usually call a catalyst if it is outside the body. However, an enzyme acts as a catalyst inside the body. Next, we have acids and bases. So an acid is a proton donor, meaning it gives off hydrogen. It is any substance that releases hydrogen ions in water. Take, for example, hydrochloric acid in the stomach. Hydrochloric acid breaks down to hydrogen ion and chloride ion. Since hydrochloric acid gives hydrogen ion, it is called your acid. A base, on the other hand, is something that accepts your proton. For example, sodium hydroxide forms sodium and hydroxide ion. The hydroxide ion is the proton acceptor right here. Okay. It will accept hydrogen to form water. OH plus H equals your water. Okay. Hydroxide is a base that accepts hydrogen. Okay, so quick tip. These are the most common acids. Okay, let's stop here. You also have your hydrofluoric, hydroiodic, hydrobromic acid. Okay, this is hydrochloric acid. These are the most common acids: sulfuric, phosphoric, nitric, hydrofluoric, hydrofluoric, iodic, and bromic acid. Did I forget something? HBr? I think I forgot something. But I can't recall what. Anyway, so a good something to tell them apart. They start with an H. Para madaling maalala. Okay? To remember your bases. Okay, sodium hydroxide, potassium hydroxide, aluminum hydroxide. Okay, they all have a OH in their name. Para madaling maalala. Okay? Next, we have the pH scale. So when we say it is a neutral solution, it has an equal number of hydrogen and hydroxide ions. It has a pH of 7, while an acidic solution has a greater number of hydrogen ions compared to the hydroxide ions. Its scale is lower. The numbering in the scale is lower. The pH is less than 7. Okay, so please take note that pH denotes acidity and basicity. We also have POH, but it is less commonly used. So the lower the pH, the higher the acidity. And the opposite is true for basic solutions, which has more hydroxide ions. It is more basic, it has more hydroxide, it is higher on the scale. Okay, so this is the normal pH range for human blood, 7.35 to 7.45. Human blood is buffered, meaning it can resist changes in pH. Okay, so acidosis happens when the blood pH drops below 7.35. So this is what happens. The nervous system is depressed. The individual becomes disoriented and possibly comatose. Alkalosis, on the other hand, is when you have too much base in your blood. It is above 7.45. The nervous system becomes overly excitable. Individual can be extremely nervous or have convulsions. So any alteration of body pH isn't good for the body. Okay, so this is the pH scale. The pH scale, medyo baliktad po. 0 is on top, 14 is on the bottom. The pH scale ranges from 0 to 14. 7 being relatively neutral. 0, which is acidic. And 14, which is your basic. Okay, pH. As pH goes up, basis, the more it is basic. If you have a high pH, it is basic. The basic property increases and the acidic property decreases. If you have a low pH, the basic property decreases while the acidic property increases. If you have a neutral pH, basicity is almost equal to acidity. Next, salts. Salts occur when an acid reacts with a base. Take for example, let's have hydrochloric acid plus sodium hydroxide. It undergoes a substitution reaction in which sodium will react with hydroxide and chloride will react with sodium. You will have sodium chloride, which is the salt, and water. Okay, so the byproduct is always water. Okay, next we have buffers. Buffers, these are chemicals that resist changes in pH when acids and bases are added. A good example is your phosphate buffer system, Sorensen buffer system, and other buffer systems. Next, we have inorganic and organic molecules. When we say inorganic molecules, they do not contain carbon usually. However, we have some exceptions like your carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide. Organic molecules, on the other hand, they usually contain carbon as their main backbone. Maraming carbons, organic molecules. They contain carbon atoms bound together by covalent bonds. An example is let's have your methane. The simplest alkane, methane. This is CH4. Okay. Carbon atoms bonded together by covalent bonds. Okay, this is the distinction between inorganic chemistry and organic chemistry. Inorganic chemistry, or your general chemistry, does not focus on carbon-containing compounds, while organic molecules, or your organic chemistry, focuses on the relationship of carbon with its other elements in terms of covalent bonding. So some inorganic molecules, let's have oxygen. It is a small nonpolar inorganic molecule consisting of two oxygen atoms bound together by a double covalent bond. Carbon dioxide consists of one carbon and one atom bound to two oxygen atoms. So this is your oxygen. Carbon dioxide, on the other hand, looks like this. It is still nonpolar. Carbon dioxide is nonpolar. Carbon dioxide is produced when food molecules such as glucose is metabolized within the cells of the body. Once CO2 is produced, it is eliminated as a metabolic byproduct, usually through the lungs. In-exhale nyo po siya. If CO2 is allowed to accumulate within the body, it becomes toxic. Water, the universal solvent, an inorganic molecule that consists of one atom of oxygen joined together by polar covalent bonds in two atoms of hydrogen. This is what your water looks like. Please take note, water does not look like this. This is wrong, but I will not explain why this is wrong. It needs more explanation. But when drawing water, it is the correct way. There's a certain chemical explanation why it is drawn that way. There's bond angles and such. It has many roles. It stabilizes body temperature. It provides protection. It facilitates chemical reaction. Most of our body is made out of water, and most of the chemical reactions occur in water. It is used to transport substances within your body. Next, you have organic molecules. This is a very basic biochemical lecture. So we have your carbohydrates. Carbohydrates provide the body with energy. These are made out of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms. Carbohydrate, carbon, hydrogen, oxygen. Carbohydrate, main role, provide energy. Okay, so C6H12O6 is your glucose. Okay, we have different types of your carbohydrates. We have monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. Monosaccharides are the simplest one. These are the building blocks of carbohydrates. When we say mono, it is one. If you combine two monosaccharides, you form a disaccharide. So a disaccharide is made out of two monosaccharides combined by a covalent bond. Take, for example, glucose plus fructose equals your sucrose, or your table sugar. Glucose plus galactose equals your lactose, or your milk sugar. Okay, please take note that table sugar and blood sugar is different. Blood sugar is glucose, table sugar is sucrose. Sucrose provides both glucose and fructose. And when you combine multiple monosaccharides, they form long chains. These are called your polysaccharides. So examples of long chain polysaccharides is your starch and glycogen. Okay, so this is an example of your bonding. What are the functions of carbohydrates? They are short-term energy storage. These are useful for everyday life. It is not wise to pull energy from other parts of your body besides carbohydrates. This is why when you don't eat rice too much, you feel weak. It is easily converted to glucose, and glucose is used to make ATP. More on this on your biochemistry. Brain cells require glucose, as all cells in the body. So don't forget to eat your carbs. Next, lipids are your fats. These are substances that dissolve in non-polar solvents. Take note that lipids are non-polar in nature. Okay? Para madaling maalala, they are oils. They only dissolve in oils also. or some organic solvents like your alcohol and acetone, but non in polar substances such as water. Kasi sabi nga po dati, hindi naghahalo ang tubig at langis. Mahabang chemical explanation, but for the sake of brevity, hindi naghahalo ang tubig at langis. It is composed mainly of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but other elements such as phosphorus and nitrogen are minor components of some lipids. They contain a lower proportion of oxygen to carbon than do carbohydrates. Mas maraming carbon sa lipids, like fats, phospholipids, eicosanoids, and steroids. So fats, these are important energy storage molecules. They also pad and insulate the body. This is when carbohydrates are too much in the body, they are stored in the body elsewhere and they are transformed into fat. The building blocks of fats are glycerol and fatty acids. Glycerol is a 3-carbon molecule with a hydroxyl group attached to a carbon atom, and fatty acids contain a carbon chain with a carboxyl group attached to one end. Triglycerides are the most common type of fat molecule. These contain 3 fatty acids bound to a glycerol molecule. So this is the structure of your triglycerides. It is glycerol, ito pong glycerol natin, combined with your fatty acid. Okay. Based on the definition of a fatty acid, it has a carboxyl group on the end. Ito po yung carboxyl group na yun. Okay, so triglycerides, tatlong glycerol na may nakabit na fatty acids. Fatty acids, these are saturated and contains only single covalent bonds between the carbon atoms. Para madaling matandaan, pag sinabi nating saturated, walang double bond. C, 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 C. Bago nakakabit yan sa iba, there is no double bond. Okay, so this is your saturated fatty acids. Walang double bond. Okay, these are found in beef, pork, whole milk, cheese, butter, eggs, coconut, and palm oil. Your saturated fatty acids. Unsaturated fatty acids, basically, if it is unsaturated, it now contains double bonds. Okay. Mali. Kasi 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3. Okay. These are the best type of fats in the diets because unlike saturated fats, they do not contribute to the development of heart disease. Palmitic acid is saturated. It contains no double bonds, and linolenic acid is an unsaturated fatty acid. Okay. Paano mo masasabing saturated? Walang double bond. Kita nyo tong part na ito. Tingnan nyo kung may double bond. Pag wala, saturated yan. Okay, tingnan nyo tong pangalawa sa baba. Hanapin nyo ang double bond. Yun, ang dami. 1, 2, 3. If it has double bonds, it is called unsaturated. Okay, unsaturated fats also have subdivisions. When we say monosaccharides fats, it only has one double covalent bond between carbon atoms. When we say polyunsaturated fats, it may have 2 or more double covalent bonds in carbon atoms. Okay, trans fats are unsaturated fats that have been chemically altered by the addition of hydrogen atoms. This makes the fats more saturated and hence more solid and stable. However, the change in structure of these chemicals makes consumption of trans fats in even greater factor in saturated fats, the risk of cardiovascular disease. So, trans fats are basically unsaturated fats na nilagyan nyo ng hydrogen para maging saturated ulit. Phospholipids. From the name itself, it is a lipid together with a phosphate group. Similar to the glycerides, except that one of the fatty acids bound to glycerol is replaced by a molecule containing phosphorus. A phospholipid is polar at the end, while the other end is non-polar. Let me demonstrate pag lumabas yung structure. The polar end of the molecule is attracted to water since water is also polar. It is said to be hydrophilic. When we say hydrophilic, it means it is water loving. It is attracted to water, while the lipid end is your lipophilic or lipid loving or fat loving. Iba pala nakasulat din eh. So it is hydrophobic. It is actually the same. It repels water. It's afraid of water. It repels water. It is more attracted to fat. Okay, look. Okay, so this is your phospholipid. This is your phosphorus, and this is your lipid layer. Okay, so lipids are fats. It is non-polar. While phosphorus, on the other hand, is charged. It is primarily polar. So this part here is attracted to water, while this part here is attracted to fats and oils. Okay, what makes phospholipids interesting is phospholipids is a polar molecule. It can react with water and it can react with, it is an amphoteric substance. It can react with water-based substances. It is polar, and it can also react with non-polar substances, such as your organic solvents. Eicosanoids, on the other hand, is a group of chemicals derived from fatty acids. They are made in most cells and are important regulatory molecules. Among their numerous effects is their role in the response of tissues to injuries, okay, particularly inflammation. Prostaglandins have been implicated in regulation of some hormones. It is important in blood clotting, some reproductive functions, and many other processes. You will encounter prostaglandins in the future. Okay, so an example of an eicosanoid is composed of carbon atoms bound together in a four-ring-like structure. Cholesterol is an important steroid because other steroid molecules are synthesized from it. Okay, cholesterol is the source of almost all your sex hormones. Okay, you can also convert cholesterol to bile salts, and it can form estrogen and progesterone and testosterone. Additionally, cholesterol is an important component of all cell membranes. Okay, so these are actually steroids. Bakit ganun? Huli yung title. Steroid is your cholesterol. When we say steroid, it is actually the structure itself. It is a four-ringed molecule. Itong titingnan niya. It is a four-ringed molecule. So this is the steroid ring. And it is actually your cholesterol. Cholesterol, upon chemical reactions, can change to estrogen, the female sex hormone, together with your estrogen and progesterone. And you also have your testosterone for the male sex hormone. It can also be converted into bile salts. What are the functions of lipids? It is long-term energy storage. It is stored in fat, and it will only be used by the body in any case that you are not able to source carbohydrates. Please take note that the order in biochemistry is carbohydrates first, then proteins, then fats. It insulates against heat loss. Mas mataba, mas namamawis kasi mas mataas ang insulation sa katawan. It also provides protective cushions for organs. This is your visceral fat. And cholesterol is important in the cell membrane structure. All proteins contain carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen, and most have some sulfur. Okay, like your cysteine. The building blocks of proteins are called your amino acids. They contain an amine group, which is your NH2, and a carboxyl group. Okay, there are 20 basic types of amino acids. Humans can synthesize 12, and these are called your essential amino acids. But the remaining 8 are so-called essential because they must be obtained in the diet. Sorry. Essential amino acids should be obtained by the body, meaning kakainin, you should eat to get them. Okay, so this is a protein chain, and each of these protein chains is made out of one amino acid. Okay. Okay, so which is the amino acid, you should contain NH2 and a carboxyl group. A carboxyl group is C double bond OH, carboxyl group. Okay. So what is denaturation? Denaturation is the alteration of protein shape through some form of external stress, most commonly high temperature, changes in the pH in such a way that it will no longer be able to carry out its cellular function. Proteins, when heated, deforms. When protein deforms, it cannot function the way it originally was. Some function of proteins: it is used to make skin, hair, nails, and muscles. It is also for transport. Particularly hemoglobin is a type of protein that transport oxygen in your blood. It also acts as enzymes. Most enzymes are proteins, and it also has some immune system functions. It is very important for muscle contractions, particularly your actin and myosin. More on this on your muscular system. And it is part of the cell membrane. Enzymes. These are biological molecules that are proteins most of the time that are able to accelerate and catalyze chemical reactions. These are the catalysts found in the body. A protein catalyst that increases the rate of reaction without being altered permanently. Hindi nagagamit ng enzyme sa chemical reaction. Next, we have our nucleic acids. These are composed of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, and phosphorus. Nucleotides are the basic building blocks of nucleic acids, and each nucleotide is composed of a monosaccharide, your sugar, with an attached phosphate and a nitrogenous organic base. So DNA nucleotides contain the monosaccharides deoxyribose and the organic bases adenine, thymine, guanine, and cytosine. DNA occurs as a double strand of joined nucleotides is the genetic material of cells. RNA nucleotides are composed of the monosaccharide ribose. Okay, kaya po deoxyribonucleic acid or your DNA, D. RNA is made out of ribose, while DNA is deoxyribose. The organic bases are the same for DNA except that thymine is replaced by uracil. RNA plays an important role in gene expression and protein synthesis. Okay. So this is the representation of DNA. And finally, we have some organic molecules and their functions. This is it is just a summary of the different functions of organic molecules in the body. Okay, please do take time to read the slides again, as most of the quizzes and activities will be sourced from the slides. Okay, thank you for listening. This has been your chapter 2.